Today we're making cannelés, and I'm going to show you how to make them with beeswax and copper molds and without beeswax and copper molds. But wait, don't you need the beeswax and copper molds to get that crispy caramelized exterior? Well, the short answer is, don't worry about it. The long answer is, don't worry about it. Seriously. I mean it. Alright, so let's start with making the batter, which is very simple, very quick and easy, comes together in a flash. First we're going to separate out 3 egg yolks, or about 50 grams if you want a more accurate measurement. Next add 2 grams of salt, and 200 grams of sugar. Next, mix that together with a spatula to incorporate all that sugar into the eggs. Next we're going to add 125 grams of pastry flour. If you can't find pastry flour, all-purpose will work. Mix the flour into the batter until it resembles coarse sand. When it looks like this, it's fine. Next you're going to add 500 grams of whole milk to a saucepan. And then add 50 grams of cubed butter to the milk. Next we'll heat up the milk to melt the butter. And once the milk reaches about 185 Fahrenheit, 85 C, we'll pour it into our batter. Add the milk butter mixture slowly while mixing constantly to ensure that the eggs don't cook. You'll get some lumps this way, but we'll be straining the batter before we bake the cannelés. Next, add 50 grams of rum and a tablespoon of vanilla bean paste, vanilla bean extract, or 1 vanilla bean. Give that a quick mix to incorporate both the rum and the vanilla. We're going to refrigerate this for a minimum of 12 hours, ideally between 24 and 48. That'll let the flour fully hydrate. Luckily I planned ahead and I already have a batter. So first I'll show you how to bake them in the copper molds, both with beeswax and without. Then I'll show you how to bake them in some other pans without beeswax. So here I've got a mixture of clarified butter and beeswax. The proportions are 100 grams of clarified butter to 40 grams of beeswax, and you're going to heat that up to about 250 Fahrenheit. We're going to be filling the copper molds over a wire rack, and one thing to note, absolutely make sure that you have some plastic wrap underneath the wire tray, because this stuff is messy. Fill the cannelé mold up all the way to the top, and immediately pour that back in. Turn it upside down to drain. To bake without beeswax, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take floured baking spray, give that a nice spray on the inside, use a pastry brush, and brush all the way upwards. Next, stick the molds in the freezer for about 15 minutes while the oven preheats to 500 Fahrenheit. So this is option number 2, a carbon steel pan. It's a set of 12 and it cost me like 30 bucks. So it's not going to break the bank, and it's a lot cheaper than shelling out 30 bucks for a single mold. So again, instead of the beeswax, just spray with non-stick baking spray, brush upwards, and stick the pan in the freezer for about 15 to 20 minutes, also while the oven preheats. Before filling the molds, give the batter a quick stir and then strain it. I'll take care of any of the clumps from earlier. Fill each mold with about 65 grams of batter. And to fill the pan, I'm going to use the reverse tear method. Give them a quick tap. And these will be baked at 500 for 15 minutes, and then lower the temperature down to 400 Fahrenheit and bake for an additional 35 to 45 minutes. The next 2 types of pans I'm going to be using are a run-of-the-mill muffin pan and a Nordic ware bundt pan. As before, you just spray the inside with the floured baking spray. Use a pastry brush to get all the nooks and crannies, which is definitely important for the bundt pan. Stick it in the freezer. For the Nordic ware pan, fill it with 150 grams of batter. For the muffin pan, fill it with 80 grams of batter. and bake both at 450 Fahrenheit for 10 minutes, and then lower it down to 400 and bake for about 35 to 40 minutes more. Alright, so these are the copper and the carbon steel cannelés. I removed them after 40 minutes, so I'd actually recommend baking the carbon steel for 5 minutes less, because they're a little bit too dark here, and the copper ones look fine, but you can see there really isn't much of a difference between the ones that were coated in beeswax and the one that was sprayed. I think this one was the one that was sprayed, only because it's a shade darker than the other two. You can't feel these like I am, but the crusts, all of these are firm. All these have rock solid crusts. So one particular thing to note about the crust is that it's dependent on the baking temperature and the time. So if you bake them longer, they'll get more intense crusts. But on the flip side, they'll become less flavorful in terms of vanilla and the rum. They'll take on a much deeper caramelized note, but the principal flavors of vanilla and rum won't be quite as prominent. Now the cannelés are all baked. You can see with the Nordic Ware cannelés, the coloration is kind of like a mix between the carbon steel and the copper. It's got these areas where the batter is more in contact with the surface of the pan, and that'll get darker as a result. I would say of the options, the best bang for your buck would be the carbon steel ones. It gets you a result that's most similar to the copper. Again, you can get the same color. You can achieve the same color as the copper just by baking them for like 5 minutes less. And I don't really like the muffin pan one as much as any of the other methods. The crust of these four haven't fully developed yet. It takes like at least 30 minutes for them to fully develop once they're removed from the oven. But even at this stage, you can tell that the fork don't lie, and the crust on these is still perfect. So yeah, that's how to make cannelés with and without beeswax and copper molds. But you know, it wouldn't be a cannelé video without me demonstrating that these do have a pretty nice crispy crust. Headphone users, I apologize. And that's the worst of the four. And just for comparison's sake, let's compare that to one of the copper molds with the beeswax. As usual, I'll put a link to the full written recipe in the description. If you give these a try, let me know how they turn out. But yeah, I'll stop taking up your time. Until next time.